And good afternoon. So for those of you on Facebook Live and now on our Zoom webinar, welcome back to episode 9 of Discuss with Russ. I'm Russell Rivera, founder and president of Voice Wealth Management. And my guest this afternoon is Andrew Kaplan. Our topic this afternoon is your money and your mind. For those of you tuning in today for the first time, the Discuss with Russ series is focused on helping you get through the crisis and start thinking and planning for what the world might look like after the crisis is over. Not just once we can leave our homes and see each other face to face again, as some of us are increasingly doing, whether it's outside New York City directly or in major cities for other reasons, for protest reasons, etc., but to anticipate possible responses in society's behavior so you can be most prepared to succeed. Voice Wealth Management, my firm, primarily works with entrepreneurs, young professionals, and their families to help them get the most out of their money. While I'm a chartered financial analyst and certified financial planner, many have also seen me as their personal CFO and financial, and I have to do this in quotes today, therapist. I always do for our guests. Recognizing the psychological power of money in addition to using short-term and long-term planning to help you get the most out of every dollar you earn and use. Now on to our guest, Andrew Kaplan. Andrew Kaplan is a psychotherapist who specializes in issues including anxiety, depression, relationships, life transitions, and interpersonal effectiveness. Andrew uses an integrative approach, which typically begins with helping clients cope with immediate symptoms. For example, anxiety that is inhibiting clients in their attempts to do their job, make decisions, or be social. From there, Andrew uses a combination of techniques to help the client identify the core factors that drive these issues. Andrew has helped a wide variety of clients find lasting relief from their symptoms and act on the goals that are important to them. As for some housekeeping issues, there is a Q&A tab for asking your questions, so please use that. And this web show is being recorded, so we will tell you how to get a recording at the end of the program as well. And with that, Andrew, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
It's great to be here, Russ.
So how often through all of this have you had people coming up to you or asking you both personally and professionally, how are you holding up or something like that? That seems to be like the thing. How are you holding up? And
it's a constant refrain.
Sure. How are people holding up? How do you think people are handling it? I know you see people who are having issues with it, but how do you think people are holding up during this crisis?
You know, it varies. I mean, people are under a lot of stress. Whatever situations they had before are exacerbated by this. We can't help but be affected because we've never experienced something like this kind of lockdown. And then, you know, what's going on in the cities at the same time. It's a load of stress. And people cope in a variety of ways. I mean, some people turn to those around them for support. Some people, physical activity is harder, but people use physical activity. Some people are, you know, I don't think anyone is in denial about the lockdown anymore, but some people just repress the situation.
Yeah, and you mentioned denial specifically. You know, I've certainly heard of people refer to this like the 5 stages of grief, right? I saw that, I think, early on in the crisis, and I've obviously tried to go through my own, you know, honestly amateurish and self-diagnosis on where am I at any given moment. So what are your thoughts on how people are handling this, and what are the parallels you drawing to the 5 stages of grief or other phenomenon in terms of dealing with this?
There are really direct parallels. That's a really good analogy and use of the stages. I mean, definitely to the 5 stages of grief go denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I mean, we saw a lot of denial in the beginning. Oh, it's not coming over here to this country. It's just contained over there, or it's not a big deal, or this group of people is safe, you know, or that group of people is safe, or we don't have to distance ourselves or change our lives at all. And then even once precautions were taken, people thought things were going to get back to normal in 2 weeks. Like, that's a form of denial. Okay, we'll take 14 days out, we'll be clean. Then once, and of course, in part of denial, you're denying it because a part of you feels helpless to change the situation. And once you're out of denial and things aren't back to normal, by April 1st or April 15th, or whenever you told yourself they were going to be back to normal, there's an outpouring of emotion, anger. It could take the form of anxiety. It could be anything. It's just all this pent up energy and also all this frustration. There's fear. And, people are afraid about what happens to my job, what happens to my finances. How about my kids? Their school is going to, are they going to get the education? How am I going to do all this from home? If you're lucky enough to be able to work from home and have your family there at the same time, if you think you're doing this for 2 weeks, that's one thing. If you think you're doing it for 3 months, that's another thing. And part of what I described there really is bargaining too. Like, you're stuck in that, you say, well, okay, I'm good for 2 weeks. I'll follow it. It'll go away. And there's all sorts of bargaining that goes on. Well, if we just do this, we get to go back to normal here. Or if I do everything I'm supposed to, my finances won't be affected somehow. Something will take care of me.
Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and then when if the bargaining doesn't work for you, depression sets in because you're stuck this way, or you feel stuck. And then there's acceptance. You would find a way forward. You're trying to, once you're in your situation and you accept the nuts and bolts of it, what you can change and what you can't, you can take the next right steps. And it's not great, but there's a sort of relief. Now, that being said, you can go back and forth between these stages. You might get angry and then just go back into denial. So that's a snapshot of it. I could babble on about it, but
well, sure. And you talk about going back and forth, and I think it's really, really imperative for people to kind of understand from your perspective, right? Being a professional, how they might be and dealing with the individual stressors of this time. But, at the same time, part of me, when I hear you discussing it, makes me wonder about information, right? And all whether we're getting enough information, whether we have enough information, whether we have the ability to collect enough information, whether or not we're getting conflicting information. We have one person in charge telling us X and another person in charge telling us Y, because there's not enough data or information to really understand and see a way forward. How much of it do you think is related to that? And, how does is that really a stage of grief, or is that just a frustration at not knowing what's going on?
That's an interesting question. I think you're right. It's not a stage of grief. In a crisis, you want reliable information. You want to, in a sense, this is an extreme way of putting it, but in a sense, a crisis makes us all children in a way, because we're looking to be taken care of. We're looking for the kind of certainty that we had when we were 7 and our parents knew everything. And of course, we're adults and we realize we're not going to get that. The world is an ambiguous place. But to have conflicting information from different people and authorities, and even with something like this too, it doesn't even have to mean that people are in bad faith when they give you information. This is something that's evolving. It's getting revised. We're understanding it as it goes along, which is very frustrating for people, because people in the end, it may not always seem like it, but our natures strive towards health. Now, some of us might be better at than others, but basically, we want to take action. We want to do what's best. We want to take care of ourselves. And if we don't feel like we have the information to do it, or if we have to change our plan every week or two, it's hugely frustrating. And then you can come to mistrust the various sources of information too, which is a function of our age, because we seem to have so much information because of the web, but how much of it can we trust? So.
Right, and even people who are supposedly trustworthy, whether it's doctors and stuff, might be conflicting and all sorts of that stuff, because we're all learning.
No, it's evolving.
Yeah.
They're giving us what they know at the moment, and it's not definitive.
So yeah, no, very, very clear. And so, you know, obviously you individually, your business, and as a practitioner, and me, just trying to figure out what's going on in my life. And I'm sure our audience as well are all dealing with all of these questions and frustrations and all of that in trying to deal with it.
I'm going to go back for a minute to
Sure.
the coping and the stages, the going back and forth between the stages. And what I find from people, and even for myself, the coping is very day by day. With one day you might feel that you have it together and you have a plan and you're calm and you're okay as you can be. And then a couple of days later, you might find you're sad or angry, or you don't know what to do because there's new information. And that's very hard for people too, that kind of volatility.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So I certainly can understand that, and I'm sure everybody is going through that. So turning it over to money a little bit, you mentioned some of the financial impacts some of this crisis has had. So how do you think people's financial circumstances are contributing to their state of mind and the actions they're taking?
I guess, that's a big topic, but the simple answer is the more secure people feel about their finances, the easier it is for them to deal with it. That being said, some people who you might think would feel secure don't. And some people who are more at risk, for whatever reason, they may have a bigger risk tolerance, or it may be denial, and it's not affecting them as much as you would think it would.
So how is that, if you're talking about risk tolerance and you're talking about states of mind and feeling more secure than they really are, or vice versa, how is that different? Or, you know, how is that different now than it might have been before the crisis, or how has that been exacerbated, do you think?
People who generally feel quite vulnerable about their situation are feeling more vulnerable. People with high risk tolerance, it's not affecting as much. And that gets complicated because there are a lot of feelings that are brought up around money too, and around just around the issues that are going on. Right.
So what are some of the issues you see that come up often around money?
First, denial is one thing. I have this stack of bills here, or I have this. If I don't look at it, it's not there. It'll be okay. Magically, it'll be okay. There's a lot of shame in our society around money. I made mistakes. I should have done better. By this point in my life, I should be here. I'm a failure because of this. I should be taking care of my family better. That's a big part of it. And that kind of shame can lead back to denial because it's too painful to look at. So, like in any situation, if your finances are vulnerable, or if your health is vulnerable, all you can do is really lay it out on the table so you know where you are. Knowing where you are is the first step to being able to go where you want to.
Did you read my marketing material? It sounds like something I've said before.
No, but there's an analogy I use about that. Like, yeah, you might not like where you are, but let's say you're let's say I'm Andrew and I have my car out here and I tell you I want to go to Boston. Well, the only way I get to Boston is if I know where the hell where I am now. I can't get from an unknown point to there on the roads.
Fair enough. I absolutely agree. Again, it's like you and I have had this conversation before, and I've talked you through the same kinds of things that I think about. So it's good tonight. It's nice to get some of that confirmation from someone doing what you're doing, that at least I'm thinking on the right track. So I do appreciate
I'm sure you go through the same thing. You provide sort of I know you called yourself a counselor in quotes, but you provide a safe space for them to talk about their finances and lay it out without feeling vulnerable or wrong in what they're doing.
Right. And it's true. And I thank you for that. It's just what you've got to do in order to say what's going on. So like even in talking about data and transparency in terms of the crisis, but also terms of, right, your money, it's like how can you lay out a prescription or a roadmap if you don't have all the information, right? I can't, to use medical terminology, I've heard this done before. You can't diagnose a problem unless you understand all of the things that go into that problem.
Right.
So I certainly understand that. One of the things, Andrew, that I'm also thinking about is how our economy will be changed, right? And realistically, the economy as a macro really comes down to individual decisions, right? So, and how people use money. So how do you think society's money, and of course I'm using that in general, but obviously these are, again, individual decisions, will be affected by the societal trauma that we're going through?
Well, if I knew the answer to that, we would both be on like CNBC right now.
They don't know either.
So they pretend. They pretend. And the answer is we can't know. I have a bunch of guesses.
Sure.
All the stuff we talked about already is there. Some people will be in denial and will keep, maybe you don't have a job and you keep spending like you have a job because it makes you feel okay. The opposite response is fear. And even, let's say you're secure, you might say, oh my God, I cannot spend anything. I should cash out all my equities and put it in gold, or something, like just a fearful response. I should hide it in my mattress. Like that's the other extreme. And you have everything in between, every response in between. It's reasonable. A lot of people worry about a huge contraction, and that's a reasonable fear.
Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you laid out both of those scenarios, right? And it's really, it's possible for me to actually logically and reasonably defend both of those scenarios. Why that might be the best course of action, on average, as opposed to the opposite course of action. Right. So the question really becomes, in terms of like cognitive biases, how do we come up with the thought process that actually ends up how we decide? Is it the logic informing the logic informing the emotional, or the emotional informing the logic? How do we should we make sure that one takes precedence over the other in our decision making?
That's an interesting question. Because the way I do therapy, both are always informing each other, that being said, the way I work with emotions is we usually have a reactive emotion, and underneath that is another one. Maybe someone who's angry is angry because they're feeling vulnerable. And to really work with the angry situations, you have to get to that other feeling. So that being said, I think, first of all, in this kind of situation, stop, take a breath, don't react. lay it out all on the table. Yeah, listen to what your gut is telling you, but then ask yourself where that voice is coming from. And as far as logic, especially in financial matters, you just got to lay it out all out, because we can't predict where this is going. You know, we can't. I mean, there are reasonable predictions to make, but we really can't make them. So, okay, if we can't predict, where do we get our like decisions from? Oddly, it's the same as if there was no crisis in a way. What are my priorities? What are my goals? How are my feelings informing those goals? But it's a rational process. And I think really a key is to respect the reactions you're having, the fear, but not to take immediate action based on a reaction. To really be as calm as you can possibly be about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I, you know, I know for myself, like I do that, right? I have the initial anger response or whatever, and I know I have to take a breath. And I know at the poker table, I should always listen to my gut because it's always right. But
Yeah.
but in terms of other things, it's like you're right. There's a whole bunch of things, and we don't logically, at least in a visceral reaction, take into effect everything. So what are the other sorts of like cognitive biases that come into people's decision making around their money?
I think it's less cognitive biases than real irrationality in my.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to think about that.
Like, so for example, Andrew, while you're formulating, you know, like obviously I think people deal with recency bias a lot. They deal with overconfidence bias a lot.
Yes.
You know, I know what's going to happen, or this is the last thing that happens. So people, right. And to some extent it's something I see and I know happens in investing all the time, right? So someone says, well, last time this happened, the market did this. And so I'm scared of that. So I'm going to do this, even though it may be precisely the wrong action, or at least not borne out by what happens.
Right.
Right. So what else can you give me in terms of things that might get in somebody's way, in terms of biases that everybody has, that might get in the way of somebody being, you know, getting where they want to go on the financial road?
I think the basic bias is at play, or one of the basic biases is thinking things are not the way they are. This shouldn't be this way, so it isn't this way. Things will get back to normal, you know, or things. It's really not being in touch. It's not being open to the information that's out there, because you're reacting either, as you said, either because you're overconfident, you know like you know what to do, or because you're afraid. Those are the two poles.
Okay. So what can people do to kind of reset their minds in terms of, you know, whether they recognize they have these biases, or maybe they don't, but what can people do to reset their mind in terms of dealing with their money or changing their money scripts to improve their financial outcomes?
The first way to change the money script is to really, it's one thing when it's in your own head, right? Like, people come to therapy. One of the reasons people go to a therapist, besides our training, is the act of saying it out loud formulates it, and also it's different. It changes it than what you think. Your thoughts are coherent in your head, but you don't really, putting it into words is a big deal. So I would say with money, and people really don't like to talk about it so much in this culture, they should put down their thoughts, like whatever they are. Oh, I don't have enough. I always know the right investment to make. I never make the right investment. I'm afraid of this. Know what your script is. Know that these are the patterns in like the way you think. Because a lot of us don't. Sometimes I have the experience with clients. I had a client yesterday, and she said something out loud about herself, and she said, "Oh my God, that's my mother talking." And in terms of money, let's say you had a depression era parent who was very risk averse or something. The depression era parent might come from we need stability above all costs. We're under threat.
Mhm.
Don't take any risk at all because it can all go to hell, or if you, God forbid, if you have like a grandparent who was a camp survivor, the voices in your head from that are huge. And
Sure.
it's good to know where the voices are coming from and what they, because once you say, "Oh my God, that's my father talking that way about taking risks," then you can sit there and say, "Okay, yeah, I love dad, but he had his life and his wisdom. I need to know what's right for me." So that's really the strongest thing you can do.
We're talking with Andrew Kaplan, psychotherapist. Again, if you have a question, we have the Q&A tab down below. We'll get to it as appropriate. So thank you for those of you who are attending, and so that we'll continue our conversation now. We're actually getting closer to the end here. So we talked about what people can do to improve their financial outcomes. What steps can people take to continue to deal with the anxiety and uncertainty, as well as I was calling it, emerging from our cocoons? We'll obviously see how that goes, in the coming weeks as New York opens on Monday, or New York City opens on Monday. What are the steps people can take, and what do you think that will, how they can set themselves up for success?
It's going to sound a bit like cliches, I think, but cliches come from somewhere. Connect to yourself. Take time. If you meditate, take a breath, take the things slowly, connect to other people, just be very aware. Try to be as aware as possible of what you're feeling and where you are and just your reactions to everything. And really connecting to other people, whether it's a therapist or whether it's the people around you, is the single most positive thing a person can do for themselves. Especially here, we've been in isolation, and I know we've all been like Zooming or whatever we've been doing. But still, despite electronic connection, it's been very isolating. So I would say seek out other people that you trust, and be real with them about your fears or about anything that's going on right now.
I think you said something there that's actually really interesting. And I heard something in there that I thought was a potential, real nugget of truth and wisdom, in the sense of, and it may have come out of this, and I think a lot of people have said it, I haven't heard about it lately, but there's a lot of slowing down. A lot of you telling, a lot of what you were saying was really equivalent to how slow down. And obviously for the last 2.5, 3 months, however long it's been affected those who have really had to be isolated, that's a lot of what's happened here. Do you think that's actually a net positive over time? Or, what do you think the effects of that will be? The fact that we've all kind of either had to slow down, or, and maybe do some of the things you've talked about, even if we can't actually, shake hands or hug or whatever.
Right. I think there's it could be a very strong net positive if people don't snap back to just their regular way of being immediately. But yes, the fact that people slowed down, I can't tell you, even yes, it's been a stressful time for everybody, including my clients. Some of my clients have really shown the benefits of it because they slowed down enough to really think about what was important to them and to think about their priorities. and to really realize which of their reactions and actions are connected to their heart and to their priorities and which are not. And that kind of conscious living and intentional living can only be a huge positive impact for anyone who's able to do it, to whatever extent they're able to do it. Because I mean, we're under assault daily. There's so much information. We're under so much time pressure. It's hard to catch a breath and really check in with your core self and with your core values.
So, and thank you for that. Got a couple of questions from our viewers. Beyond therapy, what other things can we do to cope, especially as we hear all the bad things friends or colleagues might be going through right now? So like, how do we not wear what they're having to wear?
That's a great question, and it's a big problem. I mean, because if you're an empathetic person, this is a time of a lot of pain and difficulty, and you'll absorb it. I mean, the single most important thing they can do is seek help from other people in their lives too, and just check in and be honest with themselves about what they can do at the moment and what they can't. Like if you feel yourself, it's great to be empathetic and caring for other people, but there may be a point where you need to step back and take care of yourself because you're overloaded, and that's okay. Excuse me. If you express it clearly to the other person, it should be okay.
I mean, this isn't like live television. If we had live television, we'd have a cough button for you.
Really, how does that work?
It's actually a button that you press so that if you have to cough, it actually mutes your mic for that second, and then you go back live. It's pretty cool. Another question from the viewers. Now that many are working from home, how can we manage feeling like we live at work?
If you can, it's really important to set boundaries with it. That you're going to start at this point in the day. You're going to close it up at this point in the day. I know your whole family's at home, so how do you do that? If you have an area that's private to work in, you know, you let your family know that during this time and this time, unless it's an emergency, you're going to be in there and you're working. Even though at home you're working. Plus, also just get outside if you can, because actually, let me backtrack. Having dedicated areas to work, and we're in New York, so people really don't have space, but even if it could be a corner, that's the work corner is a big help. Like don't work on your bed if you can help it. Like your bed's your bed, it's for sleeping. You know, that's the single most important thing to do, basically. And also to deal with the cabin fever, it's important to get out. I mean, before I was a psychotherapist, I was a writer, and for years I was working from home. So I dealt with all this.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think I read like Darwin, when he was working, would like literally just take laps around his yard, and supposedly like he kicked stones, and as he did that, each stone he took his mindset from thinking about his home life to thinking about evolution. That was actually something I read relatively recently.
That's really interesting. It's not a direct parallel, but something I haven't touched on here very much is one way to deal not just with working at home, but with stress in general, is to drop down into your body and ground yourself any way you can. I mean, with the breath, taking a walk, you know, doing a yoga inversion, something that brings you back into the physical. because it pauses you from everything else and it makes you feel grounded. I like the idea of walking around the backyard kicking stones. If only I had a backyard, but
Of course, you know, you me being in Manhattan, I think I have fewer. So definitely, I understand that. So Andrew, thank you so much. How can people contact you if they want to reach out to you after watching this today?
they can email me at Andrew, Andrew, Kaplan, Kaplan, at Andrew Kaplan, MHC, at gmail.com. They can call me at 646-957-3380, or they can go to my website, andrewkaplanlmhc.com.
Great. Andrew, thank you for the wonderful discussion today, because I know we've had similar discussions before. And it's great to talk to you again and
Great
go a
talk.
little bit deeper. Again, I want to thank Andrew Kaplan for joining us today on Discuss with Russ. You can reach me at russell.rivera@voicewealth.com. That's russell.rivera, that Rivera, like Mariano, at voicewealth.com. I know it sounds weird coming from a Mets fan. Or you can call me at 646-630-0980. We will be sending a follow-up email with the link to the recording on www.voicewealth.com/blog. It will be there probably within a week, usually about Monday or Tuesday of next week. You can also view all of our Discuss with Russ episodes, as well as all of our other videos on the Voice Wealth Management YouTube channel. Next week on Wednesday, June 10th, 2 p.m., we will have Adam Citron of Davidoff Hutcher and Citron to discuss how the crisis is affecting family law matters, including divorce and child custody. If you'd like to register for this webinar or any webinar that we have, reach out to me again at russell.rivera@voicewealth.com and check your email inboxes for registration emails. And of course, that will be on Facebook Live as well. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.